Generative AI is beginning to play an increasingly important role in society and business. This raises a fundamental question: on what basis should we trust AI, and how much decision-making and action can we delegate to it? Trust is not a fixed evaluation based solely on past performance. It is a judgment that considers the current context, purpose, capabilities, and risks, and determines whether the AI can deliver the expected outcome going forward. A system that continuously evaluates this expectation of future performance and dynamically controls an AI's authority and autonomy. That is the trust engine. So why do we need such a system now? Behind this need is a fundamental shift in the role of AI itself. Until now, generative AI has primarily received questions and responded with text or information. AI agents, however, understand their assigned objectives and the surrounding context, make decisions autonomously, and carry out real-world tasks. From responding to customers and reviewing contracts to controlling equipment and coordinating with other AI agents, AI decisions are beginning to produce direct real-world consequences. AI is evolving from a tool that simply generates answers into an autonomous actor that makes decisions and takes action. And as AI decisions translate more directly into action, the risks and consequences of incorrect decisions also become greater. So who should control the decisions and actions of AI, and according to what criteria? This is precisely why AI governance is necessary. As AI begins to make decisions, carry out tasks, and coordinate with other AI systems, the impact of a single decision can expand rapidly. There is the risk that an incorrect decision will be executed immediately. There is also the question of accountability. When humans and AI, or multiple AI agents, work together, it may become unclear who is responsible, and the consequences may extend beyond a single task, spreading across multiple systems, organizations, and even society as a whole. In an era where AI can decide, act, and collaborate, we must clearly define who controls AI decisions and according to what criteria. Various governance mechanisms have already been introduced to manage AI behavior. However, most of them are designed around static controls that determine in advance what is permitted and what is prohibited. But is this traditional approach to governance sufficient for AI systems that act autonomously? Traditional AI governance has relied on several mechanisms: restricting the data that AI can access, defining permitted operations through rules, managing the permissions granted to users and AI systems, requiring human approval for critical decisions, and recording executed actions in audit logs. These mechanisms determine whether an AI action should be permitted or prohibited. Of course, such measures are essential for ensuring safety and accountability. However, most of them assume that conditions and decision criteria can be defined and fixed in advance. The challenge with autonomous AI is that even if the AI itself remains the same, the circumstances at runtime may not. When the user, purpose, data, timing, or environment changes, the meaning and risk of the same action can also change. This is where the limitations of governance based on fixed rules become apparent. Consider the same AI performing the same operation. The risk still depends on who is using it, why the operation is being performed, what data it handles, when and in what environment it takes place, and what impact the action may have on the organization or society. When the context changes, the risk of the same action also changes. A routine task performed by a regular user cannot be evaluated by the same standards as a modification to critical data made with administrator privileges. Fixed rules, however, make uniform permit or deny decisions based on predefined permissions and conditions. As a result, they may place excessive restrictions on low-risk actions, or, conversely, they may allow a high-risk action simply because the AI has the required permissions. This is where we must distinguish between having the authority to act and being trustworthy enough to act in that specific situation. Permission indicates whether a user or AI is authorized to perform a specific operation. Typically, permissions are assigned according to roles, and access is granted or denied based on fixed rules. However, having permission to perform an action is not the same as being trusted to make that decision and act under the current circumstances. Trust asks a different question: can we truly delegate this action in this specific situation? At runtime, it evaluates multiple contextual factors, including the purpose of the action, the data involved, the current environment, and the potential impact. Based on that evaluation, the system may fully authorize the action. It may limit its scope or functionality. It may require human approval, or it may stop the action entirely. In this way, the AI's level of autonomy is dynamically adjusted. Permission determines whether the AI has the authority to act. Trust determines how much autonomy can be granted here and now, in this specific situation. So, what is this trust based on? Trust is not a fixed evaluation based on past performance. It is an expectation about the future, whether the decisions and actions taken next will lead to the desired outcome. Of course, we cannot directly observe the future. Instead, we use evidence from past performance and experience. We also use the decision trace, which shows what information and rules were used to make a decision, and we examine the actual outcomes produced. By combining this evidence, we estimate whether the AI can be expected to behave appropriately in the next situation. In other words, past performance is not trust itself. It is one piece of evidence used to calculate expectations about future behavior. The mechanism that turns this idea into a runtime system and continuously evaluates whether the AI can be trusted with its next action. That is the trust engine. The trust engine evaluates, at runtime, whether an AI can be trusted with its next action. It assesses more than the AI's capabilities and past performance. It examines the current situation, whether the knowledge required for the decision has been provided correctly, what decisions the AI has made in the past and what outcomes those decisions produced. It also evaluates the applicable policy, the risk associated with the proposed action, and its potential impact on the organization and society. By combining this information, the trust engine calculates the AI's expected trustworthiness, the likelihood that it will perform the next action as expected. Based on this evaluation, the system determines whether to allow the AI to act autonomously, whether to restrict the scope of its actions, whether to require human approval, or whether to stop execution entirely. However, trust cannot be determined by a single number alone. To decide whether an AI can be trusted to act, its trustworthiness must be evaluated from multiple perspectives. In the trust engine, trust is not treated as a single metric. Instead, it is understood as a multidimensional concept composed of 7 elements. The first is capability. This evaluates whether the AI has the ability to perform the task correctly. The second is knowledge. This confirms whether the AI has the information required for the decision, and whether that information is current and reliable. The third is intent. This evaluates whether the AI's actions align with its assigned purpose and human expectations. The fourth is compliance. This confirms whether the AI follows organizational policies, laws, regulations, and safety standards. The fifth is explainability. This evaluates whether the reasoning behind a decision can later be explained and verified. The sixth is coordination. This determines whether the AI can collaborate appropriately with humans and other AI systems while respecting defined roles and responsibilities. And the seventh is impact. This evaluates the potential effect of the action on operations, the organization, customers, and society. However, evaluating these elements does not produce a fixed trust rating permanently assigned to the AI itself. Even for the same AI, the trust evaluation changes when the purpose, task, context, action, or risk changes. Trust cannot be determined by evaluating the AI alone. Even an AI with exceptional capabilities and a strong track record cannot be trusted unconditionally with every action. Trust is determined by the relationship between the AI and its goal, task, context, action, and risk. For example, if the same AI is classifying general documents, the potential impact is limited, so it may be assigned a relatively high level of trust. However, if it is modifying the contents of a contract, the legal and financial consequences may be significant. In that case, the same AI may receive a lower trust evaluation. The AI's capabilities have not suddenly changed. What has changed is the purpose, task, context, action, and the risk associated with failure. As a result, the scope of responsibility that can be delegated to the AI also changes. Therefore, when considering trust, it is not enough to ask, can this AI be trusted? We must shift from evaluating the AI as an isolated entity to evaluating its relationship with a specific purpose, context, and action. When evaluating AI, we tend to ask, can this AI be trusted? but this question leads to a fixed evaluation that divides AI into two categories: trustworthy or untrustworthy. The question we should really ask is, can this AI perform this action? For this purpose, in this situation, which AI will perform the action? What is the intended purpose? What task and action are involved? Who or what could be affected? And what are the current context and risk? Only by considering these factors together can we determine whether the action can be delegated to the AI. Therefore, the question is not, can this AI be trusted? It is, how much responsibility can we delegate to this AI for this action? In this specific situation, the important point is that the trust evaluation must not end as a simple score. It must be reflected in the level of autonomy granted to the AI. The trust engine dynamically adjusts the AI's level of autonomy according to its evaluated trust level. When trust is low, the AI operates at level 1. It observes the situation but does not make decisions or take action. At level 2, the AI presents its analysis and recommends possible actions. However, humans remain responsible for the final decision and execution. At level 3, the AI prepares a proposed action and executes it only after receiving human approval. As trust increases, the AI moves to level 4. At this level, it is permitted to act autonomously within clearly defined boundaries and conditions. At level 5, the AI continues to make decisions and act autonomously while continuously evaluating the situation. However, an AI's autonomy level is not fixed once assigned. New data may become available. Policies or the operating environment may change. The AI's behavior may begin to show patterns that differ from the past. When such changes occur, trust must be reassessed, and the level of autonomy must be reviewed accordingly, because trust itself is a dynamic state that is constantly changing. Trust is not something that is evaluated once and then considered complete. In the environments where AI operates, new data is introduced, policies are updated, and the context is constantly changing. The behavior patterns of AI agents may also change. They may make decisions they cannot adequately explain, or their actions may fail. As a result of these changes, an AI's trust score may increase, or decline significantly. For this reason, the trust engine continuously monitors changes in the situation and the outcomes of AI actions. When a change is detected, it reassesses capability, knowledge, intent, compliance, explainability, coordination, and impact. It then updates the AI's current trust evaluation. However, knowing only whether an action succeeded or failed is not enough to update trust. We need evidence showing the context and knowledge available to the AI, the alternatives it considered, and the rules it applied when making its decision. That evidence is the decision trace. A decision trace records not only what the AI did, but also why it reached that decision, the context at the time of the decision, the knowledge it used, the options it considered, the policies and constraints it applied, and finally, the decision it made, the action it took, and the resulting outcome. All of these elements are recorded as a continuous, time-stamped sequence. This makes it possible to later verify whether the decision was reasonable in light of the circumstances and rules that applied at the time. The important point is to evaluate the outcome separately from the decision-making process. A good outcome does not necessarily mean that the decision itself was sound. Conversely, an unexpected outcome does not necessarily mean that the decision was wrong. To update trust accurately, we must evaluate not only the outcome, but also the process that led to it. Even when an outcome is successful, it may be an accidental success if it was based on incorrect information or a flawed decision-making process. Nothing may have gone wrong this time, but if the same process is repeated, there is no reason to expect the next attempt to succeed. If this kind of accidental success is treated as an increase in trust, future risks may be overlooked. On the other hand, even when the outcome is a failure, the AI may have correctly used the knowledge available at the time, followed the relevant policies and constraints, and applied a reasonable decision-making process. If the failure was caused by an unpredictable change in the external environment, the record can become valuable learning that improves future decisions. The trust engine evaluates more than whether the outcome was a success or a failure. It evaluates the evidence and process behind the decision, as well as what was learned from the outcome. And the starting point of that decision-making process is the knowledge delivered to the AI. For the process to be reasonable, the underlying knowledge must be accurate, current, and trustworthy. AI uses the knowledge it receives to understand the situation, consider possible options, and make a decision. Therefore, trustworthy decision-making depends not only on the performance of the AI model, but also on managing the flow through which knowledge reaches the AI. First, the required information is collected from the organization's documents. Next, an ontology defines the meaning of organization-specific terms and concepts. A knowledge graph then structures the relationships among people, organizations, rules, business processes, and data. This is combined with the current context, including the user, purpose, and environment, to generate the knowledge required for the AI's decision. The trust engine evaluates whether this knowledge is complete, whether it remains valid and up to date, whether its sources are clear and trustworthy, whether there are contradictions among different pieces of information, and whether the knowledge is relevant to the current purpose and decision. If the knowledge is outdated, incomplete, or cannot be verified, the trust engine lowers the AI's trust level and restricts autonomous execution. However, trustworthy AI governance requires more than reliable knowledge before a decision. It also requires a decision trace that preserves the reasoning and outcome after the decision, and the mechanism that transforms these two elements into expectations about the AI's next action is the trust engine. The future of AI governance will be built around three core elements. The first is knowledge flow. Knowledge flow delivers the knowledge AI needs to make decisions, together with the appropriate meaning and context. The second is decision trace. Decision trace records what knowledge the AI used, which rules and options it considered, and why it reached a particular decision. The third is the trust engine. The trust engine evaluates the reliability of the knowledge and the decision evidence accumulated in the decision trace. It then determines how much of the next action can be delegated to the AI. Knowledge flow supports the decision. Decision trace explains the reasoning behind it. The trust engine evaluates expectations about future behavior and controls the AI's autonomy. Most importantly, these three elements should not be designed as a one-way process. They must form an interconnected cycle. By feeding AI decisions, actions, and outcomes back into the next evaluation, the governance system itself can continuously learn and improve. The future of AI governance is not a one-way control system that simply applies predefined rules. First, knowledge flow delivers the knowledge the AI needs. Using that knowledge, the AI understands the current context and makes a decision based on its objectives and constraints. That decision leads to an action, which produces an outcome in real-world operations or environments. The decision trace records the process and reasoning from decision to outcome. The trust engine evaluates that record and its outcome, then updates trust for the AI's next action. Based on the updated trust level, the system may increase the AI's autonomy. It may restrict the scope of permitted actions. It may require human approval, or it may stop execution entirely. The lessons learned from each action are then fed back into the knowledge flow, improving the AI's understanding of future contexts and its subsequent decisions. In this way, the future of AI governance continuously learns from the results of decisions and actions, while continually updating trust and autonomy. However, a high level of trust does not mean that every action should be permitted. Even dynamically adjustable autonomy requires boundaries that must never be crossed. The expected trustworthiness calculated by the trust engine provides an important basis for adjusting the AI's autonomy. However, trust is an expectation about the future. It does not eliminate uncertainty completely. No matter how high the trust level may be, the possibility of failure can never be reduced to zero. Therefore, in areas involving human life and safety, fundamental rights, privacy, or critical infrastructure, execution must never be authorized based on a trust score alone. These areas require an absolute boundary, a boundary that must never be crossed, regardless of the context or trust level. The trust engine dynamically adjusts AI autonomy only within this boundary. Even when trust is high, it never permits prohibited actions. When necessary, it requires human approval or escalation to an authorized expert. In other words, the trust engine alone does not provide complete AI governance. Safe and trustworthy AI operations become possible only when it works together with multiple mechanisms, including boundaries, policies, human gates, and decision traces. This integrated system is the trust infrastructure. Trust infrastructure is a comprehensive operational foundation designed to make AI decisions and actions trustworthy. At its core is the trust engine. The trust engine evaluates the current context, capability, knowledge, intent, risk, and impact. It then determines how much responsibility can be delegated to the AI. However, several surrounding mechanisms are required to support this evaluation. Knowledge flow delivers the trustworthy knowledge the AI needs to make decisions. Decision trace records the evidence, process, actions, and outcomes behind each decision. Boundaries define the absolute limits that must never be crossed, regardless of the trust level. Policies apply organizational requirements, laws, regulations, and safety standards as runtime decision criteria. Human gates return high-risk or uncertain decisions to humans for approval or intervention. Autonomy control dynamically adjusts the scope of actions available to the AI according to its trust evaluation. And runtime society provides an environment in which multiple AI systems and humans can collaborate safely while sharing clearly defined roles, permissions, and responsibilities. By integrating this trust infrastructure into enterprise operations, organizations no longer need to permit or prohibit every task uniformly. Instead, the roles of AI and humans can be adjusted according to the situation. So, how will this transform real-world enterprise operations? When the trust engine is integrated into enterprise operations, AI autonomy changes from something fixed into something adaptive that responds to the situation. When trust is high and the potential impact of an action is limited, the AI may be permitted to act autonomously. For example, routine information organization and classification, as well as low-risk notifications, can be performed without waiting for human approval. When trust is moderate and the context involves uncertainty, AI and humans work together. The AI provides analysis and possible options, while humans supplement its judgment and guide the task forward. For high-impact actions, such as contract modifications or critical decisions, a human gate is applied even when trust is high. The AI presents a proposed decision and its supporting evidence, and execution occurs only after approval by an authorized human. If the system detects unusual behavior or decisions that cannot be explained, it reassesses trust and reduces the AI's autonomy. In this way, enterprise operations are no longer based on a binary choice between delegating a task to AI and assigning it to a human. Instead, the roles of AI and humans are dynamically reconfigured according to trust and risk. The next requirement, however, extends beyond the relationship between a single AI and a human. We also need a mechanism for mutual trust that enables multiple AI systems to divide responsibilities, coordinate with one another, and carry out work together. In the future, a single AI will not be responsible for every task. One AI will create plans, another will collect and analyze information, another will recommend products or services, and another will carry out the actual operation. We are moving toward a society in which multiple AI systems with different capabilities and roles work together to achieve a shared objective. However, exchanging data and instructions alone is not enough for AI systems to collaborate safely. For each AI, we must clearly define its purpose, the role it performs, the scope of its permissions, the policies it must follow, and who bears responsibility for its decisions and outcomes. Furthermore, when one AI delegates a task to another, they must mutually verify whether the receiving AI can be trusted to perform that action in the current situation. This trust verification helps prevent misalignment of objectives and permissions, inappropriate redelegation of authority, and ambiguity of responsibility. Trust between AI systems is not established once and then considered complete. It must be reassessed whenever the task, context, or risk changes. When necessary, the scope of delegation must be restricted, or the decision must be returned to a human. In other words, a society in which AI systems collaborate safely requires a mutual trust infrastructure, one that continuously verifies each AI's purpose, role, permissions, policies, trust, and responsibility. Finally, let us review the concept of the trust engine through 5 key points. Let us summarize what we have discussed in 5 key points. First, trust is future expectation. Trust is not a score based solely on past performance. It is an expectation about the future, how the other party will behave and whether we can work together to achieve a desirable outcome. Second, trust is contextual. Even with the same AI and the same action, The required level of trust changes when the purpose, user, environment, or risk changes. Third, trust is dynamic. Trust is not fixed once it has been granted. It is continuously updated by observing the situation, actions, and outcomes with every execution. Fourth, trust controls autonomy. How much decision-making should be delegated to AI? How much execution should be permitted? And when should control return to human approval? Trust provides the foundation for adjusting AI autonomy at runtime. And fifth, trust grows through feedback. Trust develops gradually by recording AI actions and outcomes, reviewing them, learning from them, and incorporating those lessons into policies. The trust engine supports this continuous cycle. It is not a mechanism that unilaterally restricts AI through fixed rules. Instead, it continuously observes the relationships between humans and AI, and among AI systems themselves. It then adjusts authority and autonomy according to trust. In this way, AI governance shifts from control to continuous coordination. At the heart of this approach is a continuous cycle: observe, evaluate, trust, act, learn. Finally, let us consider once again the future this cycle is intended to create. First, we observe the situations and actions of humans and AI systems, and the interactions among AI systems themselves. We then evaluate what we observe based on the purpose, context, policies, and risks. From this evaluation, we form trust within the current relationship. Then, under the authority and autonomy granted according to that trust, the necessary action is taken. Finally, we learn from the action and its outcome, feeding those lessons back into the next cycle of observation and evaluation. The trust engine does not perform this cycle only once. Whenever the situation changes, it continues to observe, evaluate, update trust, act, and learn. This is why trust is not a fixed score assigned based on past performance, nor does it mean trusting the other party unconditionally. Trust is the expectation that humans and AI systems working with one another, can understand the situation, confirm their respective roles and responsibilities, and work together to create a better future. The future of AI governance requires more than mechanisms designed to stop AI. It requires us to observe relationships, validate expectations, learn from outcomes, and continuously cultivate relationships that can be trusted. Build relationships that can be trusted. Let us build not only trustworthy AI, but trustworthy relationships. Together,